we need to talk about Deshaun Watson and this offense and where blame should be assigned. We're 3 games into the season now. So at this point, we are approaching the area of it's fair to start divvying out blame, right? After one bad game of week one, that's a little premature. It's just not a big enough, sample size and data point set to go, hey, this is the issue. 3 games in, we have an idea as to what the problem is. And there are a lot of problems. And what I want to accomplish on today's episode is have everyone to leave the video with a better understanding as to where blame should be assigned, the order of the blame, and where different fans are in terms of their frustration with this team after the 1-2 start. So I've kind of broken what I've kind of gathered up as 90% of the fans, I'm sure there's outliers and whatnot, but a vast majority of Browns fans fall into 4 different camps from what I've noticed. Camp A, let's start there. Mostly blaming Deshaun Watson. Not saying this is the majority, but this is definitely one chunk of the pie, and a very big chunk of the pie, too, of fans that feel like Watson deserves a bulk of the blame. Not all the blame, which is later on, but a lot of the blame. And I'm not trying to pick on any one person individual here. I'm just going to use Nick as an example as someone who has a large online presence and I think closely identifies to this camp of after all the turmoil the Browns fan base went through with trading for Watson and kind of being the laughing stock, this fan base still bought in and believed in the direction this team was headed, and they tuned out a lot of the noise of other people online making fun of Watson and the Browns fans and all the, massage jokes and whatnot. And here we are in year 3, and there is no good product on the field to be proud of. So I understand that, right? And Nick, we'll just kind of cycle through these, Reed. I can see where that frustration builds up. I also feel like this group of the fan base understands that Watson is not entirely to blame. So when Deshaun Watson makes a good play, they're not quick to try and bury it or cover it up or just move on from it altogether, right? They are here to enjoy the team, to celebrate the team, but ultimately they feel that, you know what, Watson probably deserves majority of the blame that we have seen so far. And through 3 games, Watson has been, I don't think, as bad when it comes to a numbers perspective. Again, if you're just box score hunting, like coming out of week 3, a guy that threw for 196 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, we have seen a lot worse stat lines from quarterbacks. I feel like this camp of frustration directed towards Watson and the Browns is more of just frustration, like I said. Frustration of patiently waiting for this great offense that the Browns moved on from Baker Mayfield from. And a lot of fans liked Baker and didn't agree with that move. But they kind of bought in on, okay, this team's going to be better. This offense is going to be better. And it hasn't been better, right? It was better with Joe Flacco, just from a pure number standpoint. So I feel like ultimately this is just more of a frustration that where are all the goods that we were promised, right? All the money that was given up towards Deshaun Watson, the contract, and all the draft picks. Well, you're not getting elite quarterback play that makes up for the lack of draft capital you've had over the last couple of years, which was the trade-off, of course, right? Deshaun Watson is worth all those draft picks because he is that great of a quarterback. He can elevate a team around him. We haven't really seen the elevation, and that's a fair gripe to have. And I understand where a lot of Camp A is coming from. I ultimately think it mostly just boils down to frustration, and Watson is an easy target to put a lot of the blame on because he has that huge contract, which, maybe takes away spending from other position groups that could help improve the general roster. And all those draft picks given up, that's going to impact the roster construction ability by Andrew Berry with no first-round draft picks for a few seasons. So I see where Camp A is coming from, but I feel like that is, I wouldn't say the easy way out, but I don't think that is the most accurate way to describe the Browns' offensive issues. Let's move on to Camp B. Camp B, Deshaun Watson is solely to blame, right? where every single thing that goes wrong, it all goes back to number 4. Anything that goes right, it's crickets. We all know what this camp is. Again, not just singling out one individual here, but just an overall embodiment of Deshaun Watson is solely to blame. Like Roberto Shenanigans, whoever the heck that is, loves to look at all the negative things Watson does. But when Watson has a great touchdown pass to Amari Cooper, crickets. Nothing, right? This is a camp that I completely reject. I reject the idea that Deshaun Watson is 100% to blame. I reject the idea that if Jameis Winston started for this team the last 3 games, the Browns offense would be 2, 3, 4, 5 times better. No, I do not agree with that whatsoever. I reject this idea altogether. And I believe with Deshaun Watson at quarterback, there have been a lot of great plays that not a lot of other quarterbacks could have made. I mean, just go back to the first play of week 3 here. Look at Deshaun Watson. This ball is mid-flight, and he is currently being stapled to the turf. Jed Wills did not win this rep against the Giants edge rusher. And despite that, despite Watson getting hit basically as he begins to release the football, this is a perfect pass to Amari Cooper. It's a touchdown, and there's crickets from anyone who puts all the blame on Deshaun Watson. I feel like this camp is mostly just, we are so fed up. We never wanted the trade to begin with, and now we're going to look at every little bad possible play and pin it on him and never acknowledge a single good play he makes. So I do not like Camp B. I am not in Camp B. Camp B to me is mostly one of 2 people. People that don't watch the Browns, right? That just look at what NFL Twitter accounts that clearly hate Deshaun Watson for his off-the-field antics, or antics is the wrong word, but off-the-field allegations, and decide we're only going to share the bad and we're never going to share the good. Now, before we look at the next 2 camps, I do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor today, which is ZBiotics. Anyone who may not bounce back after a night of drinking as well as they used to should listen up, because let's face it, when going out, you've got a choice to make. Either have a great night or a great next day. That is until I found ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. Pre-Alcohol is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to drink this probiotic before drinking alcohol, drink responsibly, and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. So stay in the loop and go to zbiotics.com/chatsports or scan the QR code on screen right now to get 15% off your first order when you use code CHATSPORTS at checkout. Sign up for a subscription so you stay prepared no matter the time or occasion. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you are ever unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/chatsports and use code CHATSPORTS at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. Moving on to Camp C. Defend Deshaun Watson no matter what. This is probably the smallest camp at this stage. It's a tough camp to be in. We all know who's in this camp. One name in particular jumps out as someone that definitely does not want to single out Deshaun Watson when there is a bad play or a bad decision. And not trying to pick on chops, but we know that he is someone that tends to try and divvy out blame elsewhere, or more commonly, just generalize the entire offense, right? The offense is bad. Never just signaling out one individual like Deshaun Watson. So this to me is a camp that covers up for Watson by pointing to other issues. And while those issues are real, the offensive line, the penalties, the pressures, those issues are real. We also have to acknowledge when the offensive line does hold up, the pass sometimes does not go where it should go, right? I mean, look here. Watson on 4th down, late in the 4th quarter, This is their second to last series. He is looking right at Jordan Akins, who is going to get the first down. Watson decides to tuck it and run. He doesn't get the first. The Giants get the ball back. They miss a field goal, and the Browns get the ball back. But the Browns could have saved a whole lot of time and timeouts and everything like that if Watson here just makes the correct read. Like, that is a play where you can just point to and go, that's on Deshaun Watson. There's no ifs, ands, nors, buts about it. There are plenty of instances where the offensive line failed Deshaun Watson. Receivers failed Deshaun Watson. The Browns lead the NFL in drops. How about no ground game at all? Basically, virtually no ground game. There are plenty of times where you can go, hey, that's really not on Watson there. He is busting his tail, and he is taking hits out there, and he's not getting a lot of help around him. Which then Camp A interjects with, he's not getting a lot of help around him because we gave up so much to get him. He's supposed to elevate everyone around him, which I get. But just because you gave up $230 million and all those draft picks doesn't make Deshaun Watson Jesus Christ overnight, right? He's not going to start walking on water just because you gave him that contract. So at the end, there are a lot of moments where blame can be placed on a whole group like the offensive line. And then there are moments like that where blame can go right to Deshaun Watson, where that is a very simplistic play that just has to be made. Camp D. My camp. Hello, campers. Multiple parties are to blame. And then we get into the order of blame. For me, if I had one wish from a genie, if Will Smith was in my room right now, I would say the offensive line is the biggest group or individual to blame. Just take this one sack right here, which, by the way, was one of 8 sacks on Sunday. DeJuan Jones gets so horribly beat on this rep. He is basically running behind his man and guiding him into Deshaun Watson, who you can see is just getting to the end of his 3-step drop. Look at the receivers. Like, they are just getting into the routes. None of them are even looking back at the football, not because they should be, but because that's how quickly DeJuan Jones gets beat on this rep. And this is not just a one-off either. I didn't just pick, one bad play from the right tackle and say, see, this happens all the time. No, Deshaun Watson has been sacked more than any other quarterback. He's been pressured more than any other quarterback. The offensive line to me here is failing Deshaun Watson one too many times. Now, in their defense, and kind of to put a little bit of blame on Watson and then maybe a sprinkle on Stefanski, when you know your offensive line isn't really playing well and the Giants are blitzing like it is remember the Titans, you have to go into the huddle and up to the line of scrimmage with a hot read, right? With a, hey, if they send 5, if they send 6, the ball is going out to you. And the you is Jerome Ford, who is wide open at the 25-yard line. It might not be a big play, but it's better than a 10-yard loss. Like, that's a moment where you can go, hey, even though the offensive line isn't doing their best, this has to get completed. It just has to get done. So again, this is where I come back to, there's a lot of blood on a lot of people's hands. The offensive line has just been simply giving up way too much pressure. 16 sacks, 45 pressures. Even though there are instances where Watson holds onto the ball for too long or he doesn't find Jerome Ford on his hot read, this is still way too big of a number. It's just, it's insurmountable, I believe. Like, honestly, the Browns might be lucky that they are 1-2 with the amount of pressures and sacks given up so far. They're number 1 in the NFL, by the way, in all these categories, and they're running away with it. Like last year, they ran away with turnovers. This year, they decided, all right, we're going to protect the football. It's going to come at a price. We're going to get our quarterback killed. 16 sacks, 45 pressures. And we're going to also double down with a lot of penalties. So, if we're going through a pecking order of who to blame and how much to blame, for me, I start with the offensive line. Then I go, Watson's not helping the cause, and there are one too many examples of him not making the right decision when it comes to getting the ball out to the right receiver or getting the ball out at all. But then I also factor in pressures from the offensive line, the drops from the receivers. If Cedric Tillman catches that ball, how different of a conversation we could be having today. Like, everyone wants Watson to be the hero. He can't catch his own passes. Amari Cooper, 2 bad drops in the first 2 weeks. Great bounce back in week 3. Tillman, very bad drop on 4th down. Like, I can't fault Watson if his receivers don't catch good passes. And there have been good passes. Okay? And then no run game whatsoever. It's like this team has not learned to live life without Nick Chubb, and it's been a year. If you knew Nick Chubb was not going to be here for the beginning of the season, which to me it seems pretty clear that the Browns had an idea of that being a reality going into training camp, maybe you should have made another move for a running back. Instead, there's this weird rotation of Jerome Ford and Deontay Foreman, where I like Foreman, but then we don't really get a lot of Foreman. You factor all that in, and this is somewhat what you get. So, offensive line, Deshaun Watson, drops and slash, running back slash ground game being non-existent. And for me, I think if you are looking to solve the issues on the offense, issue number 1 to solve is the amount of pressures given up. If we see Watson go out there in week 5 and week 4, week 5, week 6, and have a good pocket most of the time, doesn't need to be perfect every single snap, but just dramatically reduce the amount of pressures, and he's missing guys, he is not making the correct read, he is throwing to the wrong team, hey, we can revisit that pecking order. But as long as the Browns have given up 45 pressures, what's that, 16 more than second place, there's no quarterback that's going to do well in this system. That's just a fact. I don't want to hear what about last year, though. That's last year. Leave it in the past. And the craziest thing, by the way, is the Browns' offensive line at the end of the game was probably the best offensive line play, despite no one really playing in their natural position, we have seen all year. So hopefully that's going to be a wake-up call and maybe kind of a sense of urgency and a hair-on-fire moment, and we can finally get some consistent offensive line play. But I'll turn it over to you to wrap up the video. Who do you blame the most for the 1-2 start? I feel like, and I don't want to be a broken record, if the offensive line was just average, we would be having a very different conversation right now. All right, that's going to do it for us on today's episode. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it. I do appreciate everyone who sticks around all the way to the end of the video. So shout out to you guys for watching still, and I'll see you all later.